I hope, and I believe I have, raised my son to be very, very proud to be Cambodian.
We said, but it has to be with Maddox because this is going to be when he really gets, he goes back to Cambodia often. He knows what it is to be Cambodian. But he also is, because it's from the perspective of a child.
She said 4 words in a magazine interview in the summer of 2026 that quietly dismantled nearly a decade of carefully maintained silence, and those 4 words did more damage than any screaming headline ever could. Angelina Jolie told Variety that her fighting spirit had been taken down a little bit. She did not point a finger. She did not name a villain. She simply described the wreckage of her interior life, the part of herself that had gone dim during the years of legal battles, custody wars, and public scrutiny that followed one of the most explosive celebrity divorces in modern history. And in that admission, she said everything. To understand why those words landed the way they did, you need to understand who Angelina Jolie is, not as a tabloid figure, but as someone who has spent nearly her entire adult life operating from a position of fierce, almost architectural self-control. This is a woman who, at 24, was already being written about as one of the most electrifying personalities in Hollywood, who spent years building a parallel life as a United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Goodwill Ambassador, traveling to the most dangerous corners of the world to draw attention to humanitarian crises, who directed films, who raised 6 children across multiple countries, who appeared to the outside world to be almost immune to ordinary vulnerability. When someone like that tells you she got taken down a little bit, you do not ask who did it. You already know which decade-long war she is referring to. The divorce filing came in September of 2016, and it stunned the world. Jolie and Brad Pitt had been together since 2005, married since 2014, and together they were something the entertainment industry rarely produces, a couple who actually seemed to match the mythology the tabloids built around them. 6 children, an estate in France, a life that looked, from the outside, like it had been assembled from the best parts of 2 extraordinary careers. The filing shattered all of it in a single afternoon. But the filing was not the beginning. The trigger, as later became clear through court documents and reporting, was an incident that occurred just days earlier on a private plane flying from France to Los Angeles. According to allegations that Jolie's legal team would later lay out in court filings, an altercation took place on that flight involving Pitt, Jolie, and some of their children. The details, as they emerged in legal documents over subsequent years, were disturbing. Jolie alleged physical and verbal abuse. She described being grabbed, described beer and wine being poured over the family, and described children who were frightened by what they witnessed. These are serious claims, and they deserve to be treated seriously. They are also, it must be said, contested. Brad Pitt has denied these allegations from the very beginning, and has continued to deny them. Both the FBI and the Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services investigated the plane incident, and neither investigation resulted in charges being filed against him. That is the factual record, and it matters. But what is not in dispute, what no one has ever argued, is that whatever happened on that plane ended the marriage and lit a fuse that would burn for nearly 10 years. What followed was one of the longest, most grinding celebrity legal battles in recent memory. The custody dispute alone dragged through multiple courts, multiple jurisdictions, and multiple judges. At one point, Jolie filed to disqualify a private judge from the case, alleging that he had failed to disclose business ties to Pitt's legal team, a claim that generated its own wave of legal filings and appeals. The custody proceedings became so protracted and so entangled that a final resolution was still being sought years after the initial filing. And all throughout that time, Jolie maintained a public posture that was almost unervingly composed. She gave interviews about her films and her humanitarian work. She spoke carefully about her children's well-being. She declined, almost without exception, to aim direct fire at the man she had once married in a ceremony at their estate in the south of France. That estate, Chateau Miraval, became its own battlefield. In October of 2021, Jolie sold her stake in the property to a company connected to the Stoli Group. Pitt was furious, and in February of 2022, he filed a lawsuit alleging that the two of them had a standing agreement that neither would sell their share without the other's consent. The lawsuit sought tens of millions of dollars in damages. Jolie countersued in September of 2022, and her legal team's framing of the counterclaim was pointed. They argued that Pitt had been conducting a campaign of financial and legal pressure against her ever since she filed for divorce, and that the winery suit was not a genuine business dispute but another instrument of control. The winery war ground on through 2025 and into 2026, with both sides claiming victories on procedural and evidentiary grounds. It became, in the view of many observers, the clearest proof that this was not a couple who had parted badly and moved on. It was a couple still locked in combat, years after the marriage had formally ended. And then the children started speaking. Not in press releases, not in interviews, but in the most legally permanent language available to them: name changes. Shiloh, the only biological daughter of Brad and Angelina, turned 18 in May of 2024 and filed a petition at a Los Angeles court to legally drop the Pitt from her surname. The filing was notable on multiple levels. Shiloh had been, perhaps, the child most visibly connected to both parents in the public imagination, a fact that made her legal action feel even more deliberate. She paid for the filing herself, reportedly with her own money and without a lawyer. The change was made official months later. She became, simply, Shiloh Nouvelle Jolie. Zahara followed. When she was introduced at her Spelman College sorority, and when she walked across a graduation stage, she did so as Zahara Marley Jolie. The Pitt was gone from her name in all public contexts, quietly and completely. Vivian, one of the twins, worked as her mother's assistant on the Broadway production of The Outsiders, and when her name appeared in the official playbill credits for the show, it read simply Vivian Jolie. Not Jolie Pitt. Not Vivian Pitt. Just Jolie. And then, in late May of 2026, came Maddox. The eldest child at 24, the first child Angelina Jolie ever adopted, filed his own legal petition in Los Angeles to formally change his name, citing personal reasons. Maddox had been present on the plane during the 2016 incident, and reports over the years had consistently suggested that his relationship with Pitt was among the most strained of all the children's. His legal filing to remove the name was the most deliberate signal yet. 4 of the 6 children, making their own legal and public choices, removing their father's name by their own hands and their own signatures. No parent can compel an adult child to do that. These were not decisions made under someone else's influence, at least not in any legally actionable sense. They were independent choices made by young adults who had grown up inside this conflict, who knew both parents without the filter of tabloid mythology, and who had chosen, repeatedly and concretely, to align themselves with one side of the story. Pitt's own camp, in response to the timing of Maddox's filing, told the press that it was not a surprise the news had come out shortly after Pitt had won a significant evidentiary victory in the Miraval case. The implication being that the name change was strategic, a blow designed to land at a moment when Pitt had gained ground in the winery battle. Whether or not that framing is accurate, it reveals how deeply poisoned the situation had become by 2026. Every action was being read as a maneuver. Every name change was being parsed for tactical meaning. The family had become a chessboard, and the pieces were the children. Pax, the second eldest, had reportedly made his own feelings known years earlier in terms that were even blunter. A social media post attributed to him surfaced on Father's Day in 2020 and circulated widely. It contained language about Pitt that was scorching in its directness, calling him out as a poor father in terms that left little room for interpretation. The authenticity of that post was discussed and disputed, as most social media content is in high-profile situations, but the broader pattern it contributed to was undeniable. By the spring of 2026, 5 of the 6 children had, in one form or another, publicly signaled where they stood. Which brings us back to that Variety interview. When Jolie said that her children were almost all adults now, and that they were encouraging her to get back into the world, to travel, to reconnect with parts of herself she had not felt free to express during the hard years, she was painting a portrait of what recovery looks like after a decade of war. And when she said that her children knew her more than anybody and that they still liked her, which says a lot, those words were quiet, almost throwaway, the kind of thing you might not catch the first time you heard them. But listen again. She is sitting there, the woman who just told you her spirit got taken down, and she is saying, the people who know me best, who watched all of this happen from the inside, who grew up in the middle of it, they chose me. They still like me. Which says a lot. About what? About the other parent. About the marriage. About who was responsible for the damage. She does not say. She does not have to. The audience fills it in, just as she knew they would. That is the through line of this entire story, the thing that makes Jolie's approach so different from the conventional celebrity divorce playbook. She never held a press conference. She never gave a tell-all. She never, in the years between 2016 and 2026, delivered the kind of explosive, detailed, name-shredding account that the public had always suspected she was capable of delivering. Instead, she let reality accumulate. The court filings, the investigations, the winery lawsuit, and above all, the children's choices. Fairness demands acknowledging that Brad Pitt's account of this decade is different. He has spoken, in his own interviews, about his struggles with alcohol during that period, about entering therapy, about pursuing sobriety, and about working to become a better version of himself. In a 2019 interview with the New York Times, he described the period around the divorce as his lowest point and spoke about the work he had done to rebuild. That is not a portrait of someone who refused to look at himself. It is a more complicated picture than either side's loudest supporters are comfortable admitting. Both Jolie and Pitt built this life together, and lives that break apart after more than a decade, 6 children, and 2 demanding careers do not usually fracture because of a single person's failure alone. The truth of what happened between them almost certainly lives in a space more complicated than any court filing can capture. But that complexity does not erase what has become visible. For children, making their own choices, removing a name. A woman describing the damage done to her spirit in language calm enough to land like a verdict. A decade of silence that turned out to be the loudest statement she could have made. Angelina Jolie did not expose Brad Pitt in a single moment or a single interview. She exposed him the way water shapes stone, through years of quiet, steady pressure that eventually revealed the shape underneath. In the summer of 2026, she told the world her fighting spirit was coming back. And the people who gave it back to her, she said, were the children who knew her better than anyone. The children who had looked at both parents without illusion, without the softening distance of celebrity mythology, and made their choices in courtrooms and on graduation stages and in Broadway playbill credits. Jolie did not need to say what those choices meant. She simply pointed at them, gently, and trusted the world to understand. After nearly 10 years of saying almost nothing, it turns out she had been saying everything all along. And the children's signatures said the rest.